In 2025, the Philippine government poured $405.7 billion into what was supposed to be a historic push to end the country's endless flood woes. The promise was bold. With this massive budget, the nation would finally rise above its decades-long vulnerability to typhoons and monsoon rains. But as the months passed and the storms rolled in, the reality became painfully clear. The money did little to change anything. Metro Manila still drowned under hours of heavy rain. Provincial towns were still submerged for days, and families still clung to rooftops waiting for rescue. The grand budget, hailed as a solution, turned out to be a staggering failure. Most of the funds were funneled through the Department of Public Works and Highways, which announced thousands of so-called priority projects. These ranged from drainage upgrades and pumping stations in the capital to embankments and retention basins in Luzon and Visayas. On paper, it looked like an ambitious plan. But in practice, many of these projects either stalled, were poorly executed, or worse, existed only on paper. A large chunk of the budget went to consultancy fees, feasibility studies, and contracts awarded to favored contractors. Insiders whispered about padded project costs, ghost deliveries of construction materials, and kickbacks flowing back to officials who approved them. Allegations of collusion between local politicians and contractors became common talk in the affected communities, but investigations went nowhere. By mid-year, the cracks in the system were undeniable. Heavy rains from the Habagat monsoon and Typhoon Karina once again turned Manila's main roads into rivers. Newly built drainage systems clogged within weeks because there was no proper waste management plan to accompany them. In provinces like Pampanga and Cavite, families who were promised relief still found themselves knee-deep in muddy floodwater. Retention ponds and pumping stations that were touted as game changers were either unfinished, malfunctioning, or outright useless. Some of the dredging projects in the Pasig-Marikina River were so superficial that silt returned after just one storm. People began questioning why, after such an enormous budget, the same old flooding nightmare remained unchanged. It became clear that the spending spree was less about solving a crisis and more about creating an opportunity for corruption. Contractors rushed to finish low-quality work to collect their payments. Overpriced materials were purchased, and projects were deliberately fragmented into smaller contracts to evade stricter auditing. There were even cases where drainage projects overlapped, leading to redundant structures that served no real purpose. Community leaders complained that their areas were promised flood control measures but saw only temporary road repairs disguised as flood mitigation. Meanwhile, billions of pesos supposedly allocated for flood-prone rural areas never even left the national offices. The government tried to defend itself, saying infrastructure takes time to build, but the public saw no major changes. Instead, residents kept posting viral images of waist-deep floods in city streets just months after ribbon-cutting ceremonies for new flood control projects. Even long-term flagship ideas like the Laguna Lakeshore Dike or the much-hyped smart stormwater tunnels were either delayed indefinitely or plagued by legal and logistical problems. Maintenance of the few completed projects was neglected, causing them to fail at the very moment they were most needed. In the end, the P405.7 billion flood control budget of 2025 became a glaring symbol of mismanagement. The money disappeared into layers of bureaucracy, corruption, and inefficiency, leaving ordinary Filipinos to suffer the same fate they've endured for decades. Far from transforming the country's resilience, the program reinforced the public's worst fears. That massive infrastructure budgets are nothing more than cash cows for those in power. It was a lost opportunity that not only failed to protect lives and property, but also eroded what little trust remained in the government's ability to confront the climate crisis. Instead of hope, 2025 left behind a bitter lesson. No amount of money can stop the floods if corruption keeps drowning the solutions before they even begin.